32 Smith & Wesson Long versus 32 H&R Magnum. What I have today are some lead semi Wadcutters. These are 90 grain Hornady lead semi Wadcutters, and those bullets were sent over to the channel by one of my Patreon supporters, Hillbilly Scholar. So thank you for sending those bullets over to the channel for testing. So I loaded up a whole bunch of these in 32 Smith & Wesson Long and 32 H&R Magnum. I went by the load data. So I got 2.1 grains of tight group powder in our 32 Smith & Wesson Long and 2.8 grains of that same powder in our 32 H&R Magnum. So I'm going to use my 4.2 inch Ruger SP101 and my 1.875 inch Ruger LCR to do this test with both of those cartridges. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to do my real world simulation with every one of these shots. So basically all this is I got one layer of t-shirt on the front there because these are non-expanding bullets anyway, but I like to stay consistent with a little bit of fabric. 3 inches of clear ballistics followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum. 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and then another 1/4 inch MDF at the back that represents hitting back ribs. So this is really representing about a 9.5 inch thick individual with ribs in there, because clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh. So 3 inches is more like 1.5 inches in an actual living target. 16 inches is more like 8 inches in an actual living target. So we'll do both barrel lengths with both cartridges in our real world simulation, see how they all compare, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 32 Smith & Wesson Long. I'm going to run the 32 Smith & Wesson Long through both barrel lengths and see how these compare for velocity. So 90 grain semi Wadcutter, and I did put in my 9-pound hammer spring in this SP101, so if I do get some light primer strikes, it's likely due to that, and I'll have to change that out. But I wanted to see how this 9-pound spring would run in this thing, because it gives it a really light trigger press. So let's see what we get here with our 32 Smith & Wesson Long 90 grain semi Wadcutter and our 4.2 inch Ruger SP101 and 327 Federal. 769, 734, 771, 739, 774, 708. Not super consistent, but yeah, that trigger is like butter. Now let's see what we get in our little snub nose LCR here, 32 Long. $726, $691, $709, $673, $715, $710. And I will say that both of these, the recoil is super low. Both of them shoot pretty much like a 22 long rifle. So now we'll move on to our 32 H&R Magnum here. And I'll reload these here with our 32 H&R. Same bullet, but instead of 2.1 grains of that tight group powder, I actually have 2.8 grains. So let's see what we get here with our 32 H&R Magnum. See if we get above that, you know, mid 700s or so. 32 H&R Mag, 4.2 inch barrel. $930, $893, $912, $879, $850, $897. So I'm actually pretty surprised. I mean, there's definitely more smoke from, you know, the powder hitting the bullet base and burning it a little bit and burning some of the lube on these bullets. But I wouldn't have thought going from 2.1 to 2.8, just 0.7 of a grain would make that much of a difference. That's a big difference. Never would have thought to see that much difference. And we had about the same velocity here. Now, with our 32 Long between the two barrel lengths, now I'm guessing that we're going to see a bigger drop with this because it's a more powerful cartridge and a shorter barrel. So I would guess we're still going to be mid 700s to 800 maybe. Let's see what we get through our snub. 835, 825, 855, 830, 839, 788. All right, so all of them except that last one are pretty consistent. I will say again, both of these are pretty low recoil. I can't describe them necessarily as the 32 H&R Magnum as being like 22, but I mean, it's maybe 22 Magnum type recoil. It's still very, very low recoil. So let's hit our Ballistics gel block and see how these will do. All right, first up in these revolvers, we're gonna have our 32 Smith & Wesson long as our first shot into our ballistics gel test. So I'm gonna do the 32 long right now through the 4.2 inch barrel and then through the 1.875 inch barrel. So 32 Smith & Wesson long semi-wad cutter. See what this does. Real world simulation. All right. Let me hit that one more time because that's not a valid shot. It went down. I don't know where it went to. All right, 32 long. One more time here through our 4.2 inch barrel. All right. Now let's do our 32 long through the little snub here. Let's go take a look. All right, so that made a big difference based on velocity there. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. Maybe we got some tumbling with the snub, and yeah, we do. It's kind of thinking that we would see something like that. So our first shot with the 4 inch, it looks like it was starting to keyhole a little bit. And then the second shot with our 4.2 inch, we went in perfectly straight. So it got a nice deep penetration. With our snub, it tumbled. So we're just not getting enough velocity with it through the snub for that to be an effective load, but through the 4.2 inch barrel, it's plenty of velocity to stabilize that. So very interesting performance. So our 32 long here through our 4.2 inch barrel, we got pretty good damage path going on in there. Really good. The first 3 inches here, it looks like the snub had actually started to tumble right away, which is obvious because it went through our rib simulation tumbling. So it looks like there's more damage in that first 3 inches, but really it's just from tumbling. But I would say it's an ideal performance with our 4.2 inch barrel. We went right to 13 inches of penetration. Camera parallax will throw that off a little bit, make it look like it's going a little bit deeper than what it actually is. But from a straight on view, we're already at 13 inches from our 4.2 inch barrel. Now when we look at from our snub nose barrel, 1.9 inch barrel, we're at about 8.5 inches of penetration. So it's totally fine in that 4 inch barrel, but not in that snub. So the 32 H&R Magnum is going to push that that bullet from the snub actually faster than what it was going through the 4.2 inch barrel. So that might actually make it perform well with our 32 H&R Magnum. So let's try our 32 H&R Magnum and see how they compare now. All right, 32 H&R Magnum, a lot more velocity in this particular revolver. So let's see what we get here. 32 H&R Magnum, real world simulation. All right, let me shoot that again. Not a valid shot. I don't know what's going on with that gel block and then going to the bottom like that. All right, 32 H&R Magnum, again through the 4.2 inch barrel. All right, now let's hit it. Going through our 1.875 inch barrel, 32 H&R Magnum here. And see how this does. See if it's acceptable out of the snub here. Let's go take a look. right, so I would say it's still not quite acceptable out of the snub. I mean, both of them hit really hard, but it does look like I'm seeing the same type of thing going on here. Almost exactly the same as the first. Almost a slight keyholing with that first shot. The second shot perfectly straight, and then the snub keyholing. Interesting. So, you know, why did the first two shots start to do that? I have no clue. Yeah, I think it probably just has something to do with angle. I'm angled just a little bit down, trying to make those shots. As were these, my muzzle's a little bit straighter, but my muzzle's straight with these as well. So I would say these are definitely valid shots. They're going in straight because I'm aiming the muzzle straight, and they're going in straight. I'm aiming the muzzle straight with the snub, but they're not going in straight. So same type of thing going on. So it's going to say that, you know, this is acceptable for the through the 4.2 inch barrel, but not through the snub. It's just not enough barrel length to stabilize those. So with our 4.2 inch barrel, we got actually a little bit better penetration through our rib simulation, and we got a penetration of about 13 and a half, or 13 and 3/4, I should say, 13 and 3/4 inches. So 3/4 inch more than what it got without, you know, with the 32 long. So yeah, just that both of these did pretty well. Not a huge difference in the performance, other than the damage path is a little bit greater with the 32 H&R. Now 32 H&R through the snub here, again, we got the subpar performance. We only got about 10 and a half inches of penetration. So this is very interesting here. I would have never thought that, you know, these little bit difference in velocity and barrel length would make a big difference like that, because the 32 H&R through our snub had as much or more velocity than the 32 long through the 4.2, but it just didn't stabilize it here. So what we can see here is that really bullet stabilization is the big picture here. It's not so much the velocity, it's just, you know, you got to have enough stabilization of a bullet in order for it to penetrate adequately. Overall though, none of these over penetrated. So what I'm looking at here is not so much a comparison of the ammo, but a comparison of the gun. And I'm going to say that 4 inch, a little more than 4 inch barrel is really good with both 32 H&R Mag and 32 long with the semi-wad cutter. Both got, you know, 13 and 13 3/4 inches with no over penetration. That's really fantastic. But when we're talking the snub, it's just not a good bullet for that. So let's pull these out of block. We'll take a close-up look at them. Then I'll shoot our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets. I had to write these down just because it's nowhere to write on these bullets to figure this out. But yeah, there's a big difference here between barrel lengths. And we saw the same results with both 32 H&R Magnum and 32 long through the snub nose. And then again, the same results through those different calibers through the 4.2 inch barrel. So if we're going to look here at our 32 Smith & Wesson long, you know, here's our one through our snub. Here's the one through our 4.2 inch barrel. And we can see the one with the 4.2 inch barrel impacted straight and just really flattened that semi-wad cutter nose down. As where the one through our snub there, you can tell it hits kind of off-kiltered a little bit. And it just puts it through, you know, at kind of a weird angle. And it causes that tumbling. So a huge difference there. And we see exactly the same thing with our 32 H&R Mag. We increase the velocity, but that barrel with that snub just doesn't stabilize that. As we're through the 4.2 inch, it hits perfectly straight on, flattens down a little bit. And overall, not terrible performance with that 4.2 inch, but that snub, it just doesn't like that. So big difference here. So, you know, these are kind of heavy bullets for 32, you know, 90 grain, and then they have a long nose as well. So a lot of that weight is on a narrow nose. Like, let me grab one of these unfired one over here. You see that? You know, the nose is so narrow that it makes the overall length extremely long for a 32 caliber. You know, if you had, let's say, I don't know, maybe 60, 70, 80 grain, let's say 80 grain, it would probably be a third shorter than this, and it would stabilize fine in a snub. But yeah, these are just way too long for that snub. So that's a close-up look at those. All right, 14 yards from the target, so I just want to get a front sight picture and pop these off as fast as I think I can hit the target. So I want to see if there's a difference in each gun from the 32 Smith & Wesson Long to the 32 H&R Magnum. So I run some 32 Smith & Wesson Long in my 4.2 inch barrel. Same gun, try the 32 H&R Magnum, see if that feels any different, and then I'll repeat that in the snub nose. So 4.2 inch barrel, we're loaded up with our 32 Smith & Wesson Long. I get a front sight picture, pop them off, then I'll try our 32 H&R. So 14 yards, 32 long. All right. Shoot pretty good. Now I'll try our 32 H&R. There's just not a big difference there. I mean, there's a difference in recoil, but it's one of those things. They're both so low that, you know, a lot more with the one that has a lot more is still very low recoil. So it's very hard to judge it. So we'll try it in the snub here and see how this does. So 32 long first. So the recoil is pretty low, but I'd say the muzzle rise with that is kind of like the 32 H&R out of the longer barrel. Now we'll try our 32 H&R out of the snub. So, yeah, obviously this has the most recoil out of all these options here, out of these two different guns, but the recoil with this is still lower, way lower than 38 Special. So just to give you some idea that it's just very easy to shoot overall. So let me back it up and see how these shoot from some distance. All right, 75 yards from the target, not practical for most people, but I like to see if there's a difference when I'm doing hand loads. If, you know, I can hit the target with one load, but maybe not the other. It tells me a little bit about the load. So biggest question here is that 32 Smith & Wesson Long, is there going to be enough oomph to even reach the target at that distance very effectively? I don't know, but we'll start with the 4.2 inch barrel, 32 long, and then I'll move on to the 32 H&R Magnum, just like I did at 14 yards, repeat the process with the snub. So let's see what I can do here with our 32 long through our 4.2 inch barrel. 75 yards. I don't know where that went. Right above the target. Huh. All right, so those are kind of just going all over the place for me. I wasn't seeing anything consistent. I saw one hit below the target, one hit above the target. So yeah, there really just wasn't enough oomph to do very well at that distance with the 32 long. So I'll switch on to the 32 H&R Magnum. We got some decent velocity with these. So let's see how this will do from 75 yards. All right, so those are going pretty much all over the place. I didn't see where most of those went, but that last one hit to the left by like 15 feet. So that tells me something's a little bit off there with those loads at this distance. So very weird for me. 32 long. Let's see how I can do with these. Snub nose. All right, that last one I aimed over the target by a few feet. I was kind of experimenting with different holds, seeing where they would go. So 32 H&R Magnum, snub nose. Let's see how these things will do. No clue where that's going. All right, so first time viewers, insert your comments here and laugh. But yeah, that's kind of weird. I just wasn't seeing anything consistent with these, and I think I saw kind of the same thing with the Hornady 38 caliber bullets. It's almost like they're just not quite as accurate as some bullets. I don't know why, but you know, when I'm seeing things where it's like I'm seeing some hit to the right by a couple feet, and then I'll fire one and it hits to the left by 15 feet, 18 foot from one to the other. You know, it is hard to shoot from 75 yards, but when I've been known to shoot 16, 18 rounds at the target in one video and never miss one or miss one, you know, that's just something's a little bit off with these bullets at distance. But overall, you know, this kind of doesn't matter, but I still like to know. But when we look at the accuracy up close, totally fine accuracy up close. They shot really good. And looking at our terminal ballistics, you know, the terminal ballistics can actually tell you a little bit about what's going on here too, because what did we see? We saw some kind of sporadic entering of that gel depending on the angle of the muzzle. And that type of sporadic thing, and when it hits gel and does that, can the air resistance can do that kind of thing too. So they just didn't perform all that well, but up close, very low recoil, very accurate, very easy to hit the target. And through the 4.2-inch barrel, both of these loads did fine. So I would definitely not load these up for a snub and use them for self-defense. But if you're in that situation where you want something that's super, super, super low recoil, lower than a 38 special, as low as a 22, but still gets adequate penetration, I would use this particular 32 long out of this. That would be awesome. That would be perfect, because, you know, the person that doesn't shoot a lot, this is not going to be intimidating to them. You know, someone that is recoil sensitive could easily shoot this with less recoil than a 22 and be better protected than a 22, because with a 22, the best of the best hollow points will expand to like 30 caliber and under penetrate. This is already at like 31 caliber and penetrating adequately. So I would say it's a pretty good niche option for someone that's recoil sensitive. So very interesting test, and thank you to Hillbilly Scholar for sending these over the channel. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.